Welcome to the next episode, or this episode of Convos. We have very special guests today, Freud and Rob Carroll of CampusReel.
Hey guys, this is Sheila and Maya Dunne, and you're listening to Convos. Let's get it done, bitches.
Yeah, so welcome Nick and Rob. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having us. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, so just as a background for our listeners, Nick and Rob are founders of CampusReel, which has a host of thousands and thousands of videos created by students for students across universities all across the globe, right, guys? You guys are international as well?
Yep.
Yeah, so obviously with COVID and things going more virtual too, I'm sure there's a lot of updates that we'll be excited to hear about with CampusReel. So I really liked the saying, sort of turning students into storytellers. Could you guys give just a brief background on like how this idea came into fruition and how it's evolved over time?
Rob, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So on a high level, Nick and I went to school with Sheila, or at least at the same alma mater. And we had been kind of working part-time on CampusReel for 5 or 6 months. And I was working at a full-time job doing something else. Nick was too. Colgate gave us a grant to essentially develop the very first iteration of CampusReel, which at the time was very traditional university virtual tours. And it seemed like a very compelling idea. We were young. We didn't know anything about building a business or scaling a business. Eventually, over the course of those 4 to 5 months, we realized that idea was just not very scalable, super capital intensive. A lot of reasons why it didn't make sense as a business for us to go down. But we did recognize this need in the market where prospective students and families, in order to get an understanding of their university options, they pretty much needed to visit in person, or they needed to know somebody on campus, who was maybe a few years ahead of them in high school. If you didn't have those two luxuries, you were pretty much shooting in the dark. So we realized that we could essentially help bridge that information gap by crowdsourcing videos. And our videos are very different than traditional university videos. These are made by students through their own lens. It's essentially crowdsourced. And we could do that or leverage that idea and technology to create thousands of perspectives across hundreds of universities in the world much more quickly than going campus to campus with a VR camera. So to date, we have a website for CampusReel that has 500,000 monthly users. We also have a partner network where all of our videos are syndicated across the web, and that reaches 3 million students a month. And now we're really focusing on growing our core revenue business, which is university partnerships. So we've partnered with not just universities, but programs actually across undergraduate, graduate, domestically here in the US, Canada, now into Europe, and we even have a client in Singapore. So we're really focusing on scaling that offering, and that's kind of, in a nutshell, what's happened over the last 4 years.
Wow. So when you were in the Entrepreneurs Fund, so that's how we got connected, is through the summer program at Colgate. How many, you were just getting started, so you had, do you know roughly like your traffic or?
We didn't even have a web.
We had a Google Drive folder with like 3 videos in it that we could show some people.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So 4 years later, you're 500,000 users on the platform.
Yeah. And we reached more than that, but yeah. And, our goal is to hopefully triple that or 5X it in the next 12 months. Exactly 1 year ago, we had 100,000 monthly users. So we've had 500% growth in 12 months. And a year and a half ago, we had like 2,000 monthly users. So we did have that kind of traditional hockey stick growth, but it wasn't a hockey stick the way like Snapchat and Uber and all these other companies kind of explode that investors try to make you think is realistic. There's like a lot of engineering that went into it. But yeah, the growth has been really good for us.
To Rob's point, like to get a deep understanding of a school, you really have to go visit. but there's millions of students every year who just like simply do not have the resources to go travel the country to look at their college options. And it felt really silly to us that one little pain point, the fact that they couldn't travel, was such a limiting factor in their college search decision. And you know, what college you go to is like the most consequential, scariest decision that a young adult gets to make. And we just realized how many millions of students are doing that every year with incomplete information. So it wasn't necessarily that we thought we had the best business idea ever, or that we kind of did like naively at the time. We just always said to ourselves, like, if we don't build this, someone else is going to. Like, this is a real problem that isn't going anywhere.
How was that risk? Like, was that risky? Did you feel like it was a big risk, or were you just so confident in the idea that there was no second thoughts in terms of moving from what you were doing to pursuing this full time?
I think it's the beauty of doing this when you're young. Like, I think sometimes people give advice like, go work for, you know, 5 to 10 years, like wait until you have the perfect idea that you feel really comfortable doing, have some corporate experience, you know, when you're young in your 30s, like that's a good time to go after it. But I mean, Rob had it, I was bartending, so it was like no risk to me, but Rob had a real job, but I think he was not super pumped on it as it was. We didn't have kids to support, like we didn't have, you know, a whole family that we needed to go out and do. We didn't feel like our career would be like massively derailed if we went and tried something for a year. So I think we really just rode out that energy of like, we're young, we're in our 20s. You don't have too many shots to like take a real risk. And this really just felt like the time to do it. And then I think we also both had a very unjustified but high level of like confidence in ourselves and just our ability to pull something off. Like, I think we both always felt like, you know, we had always been brainstorming ideas. Like, this wasn't the first business that we had thought of. It was just the one that really stuck. But I think we had always felt like if we could come up with an idea that realistically could exist, then we could probably pull it off, which was not justified, but that's kind of how we felt.
You have to have some confidence, right? And persistence and optimism, right? It has to be almost.
So what actually, it's funny because I was talking with somebody yesterday who kind of, you know, sporadically quit their job with no real reason or rationale, and they want to start a business, which is great. And I support all that. Their business could not be more in its infancy. Like, they literally thought of the idea 2 days ago and they quit their job the day after. And I would say that, to Nick's point, we both share the same philosophy. Entrepreneurship is completely experiential. Doesn't matter how many textbooks you read, how many stories you listen to, you're either doing it or you're not. And there's really nothing that can prepare you for it. You just have to jump into the deep end. And you definitely have to take a leap of faith in doing that. At the same time, if you actually look at our timeline, like Nick and I were only doing this part-time for the first 4 or 5 months, I think. You know, I had a good job. I realized very, very early on, like within 3 weeks of being at my job, that I wasn't going to learn anything that would prepare me to start a business. That's no offense to what those jobs provide. There's a lot of other things that they provide. I got really good at Excel and all this other stuff. But in terms of building a business from 0 to 60, that wasn't there. And I realized that, and that's not what I wanted. So I was very willing to jump ship, but I was also very careful in how I jumped. Like, I wasn't just jumping into the deep end, you know, like I knew how deep the water is. I had some life preservers on hand, you know, like I felt okay taking that risk, but it wasn't like we thought of the idea and 2 weeks later, you know, both of us were full-time on CampusReel, never looked back. There was a 4-month kind of cushion where we validated the market. We talked with people at Colgate. We talked with directors of communications. We did a ton of research into this. And then it was once Colgate gave us that grant, that's where we had the stamp of approval, where it's like, all right, 60 people applied for this grant, 5 people got it. We're on to something. Worst case scenario, we do this and it doesn't work out, but it was an awesome experience and we couldn't have tried to hedge our bets anymore, you know? Right. So I would just say, like, there's a lot you can do on an idea before having to completely throw everything to the wind and take that leap of faith, you know?
I also think just one more line to that. And I said it earlier, but I think it also applies to this. Like, I felt so much more willing to take the risk because we were solving a problem. And also because we were doing something that was within a pre-existing industry that we felt like was very antiquated and there were a lot of issues. And the key problem we were tapping into, again, it wasn't going anywhere and it really affects a lot of people. I think if we had a business that was like a value add as opposed to a problem solve, like there's nothing that those are great businesses if you can pull them off, and there's a lot of really good ones. But I think, there's a big risk to kind of take the leap in faith and start. I feel like the bigger point where it felt like a risk was when we were like a year and a half in, 2 years, and like we had good traction, but if there was no telling if this was going to work or not. Like we still felt so confident, but like you're kind of just like getting owned all day. And then we were getting to the point, like we've been doing this for 2.5 years, like we've sacrificed salaries. How much longer are we going to do? Like at that point is where I think there was like, I was starting to think a little bit more about my life. I'm like, okay, I'm becoming 26, 27. Like at a certain point, I can't be like doing an entry-level job at 30. But I think the thing that really held us on there is like, we're solving a problem. This isn't going anywhere. And if we can pull this off, it'll be so helpful for people. I'm not sure if we would have had that level of confidence or persistence if we were making, like a value add app or something.
Yeah, so I completely agree with the timing of things. Our very first episode was actually why you should start a business venture in college. Take an opportunity of a time where you don't have as many responsibilities, and there's so much you can do as well that part-time, right? You can work, validate it, do your research before just taking the plunge. The other thing too is I think it's super helpful to have a team. Like you're going in with someone else, you're both on the same page. But so you went from this year and a half, then 2 years later being on Forbes under 30 and tons and tons of traffic and momentum going. What changed?
Yeah. So I would say one, that I think when people look at startups, it's really difficult for people on the outside looking in to quantify success or where you're at or kind of like how well the business is doing. And I think there's kind of 3 metrics that people use to get an understanding of where a startup is at. One is how much money have you raised, which I think is a really misguided way to quantify it.
Horrible.
2, how big is your team?
We could have a whole episode on that, Sheila.
Yeah, we could. Yeah. 2 is how big is your team, which I also think doesn't make any sense to quantify it. And then 3 is what kind of press and recognition have you received? So I think to your point about like the Forbes 30 under 30, we got that, that was last November. That was about a year ago. And it was like one of the coolest things that's ever happened to us, a phenomenal point of recognition. We definitely got a lot of exposure on a national scale, which was great. But that was not like where we felt like we arrived or we necessarily made it. That was to the outside world looking in. I think it gave that perspective. But for us, we still had a lot of things that we needed to figure out from a business perspective. And it was amazing and it gave us a push. But we didn't feel like we really arrived until our business as we understood it was at the point that we wanted it to be, where we understood our business model, where we saw a clear path to keep scaling. When we became profitable, like that was a way bigger milestone for us. Yeah. So it doesn't exactly answer the question, but it has been interesting to me how the perception of success and making it and doing well is very different than the reality can be.
Yeah.
And also like, I don't know, if we had to break CampusReel up into a few component pieces, like prior to Forbes 30 under 30, I don't think that there were any big things that we could point to that we could say, see, that idea or that event is what led to this, right? To be honest, over the last 6 months, there have been a lot more existential changes. Like we've made multiple new hires, we've gotten some really big contracts, and we're reinvesting that money to do things that are moving the business in a fundamental way. What's weird is if you look at the first 2.5 or 3 years of this business, like it was just tiny little micro advances every single day. And that's kind of what was so brutal about it. Like you wouldn't wake up and have this aha moment where all of a sudden the game just changed. It was just inch by inch by inch by inch. And maybe every now and then you'd move 3 inches at a time. But it was really small, and it was essentially just every day showing up and pushing the sled forward a little bit more than it was the day before. And then eventually we started getting momentum, but like you couldn't pin that momentum to any specific thing,
Yeah, that's why patience is so important. And we were talking about this, Maya, with Ryan in our other episode, just, he had graduated college, was really successful in college, graduated, and then, felt like it took probably a year and a half for these tiny little advances to make sense of something. But as long as you're not going backwards, those things help.
Well, and that is to your point, Sheila, about starting a business in college. I mean, I did my first little business in college. It was essentially a Craigslist for colleges, and it was cool. I was in no position to run it. We never made a dime, but it was like I learned, okay, it's not that tough to build a website, and it's not that tough to do a lot of things that, from an outsider's perspective, like you don't even know where to start, So that's when I realized, like, oh, entrepreneurship is not this thing that is only accessible to a few people. Like, you just really have to take the leap. And that's where I also realized that that's what I wanted to do. But the patience, Nick and I both say, patience has been the single biggest factor to our success. And I think when you start running out of patience, or you get tired of kind of being in this holding pattern, that's when people raise money that they shouldn't be raising. They hire people that they shouldn't be hiring because they think, we're not making money, let's hire a sales guy, right? But if you don't know what your product is, you don't know how to sell it, that guy's not going to make you any money. He's just going to increase your burn and your expenses. And Nick and I were like probably patient to a fault. And I think that's why CampusReel didn't go under in their first 2.5 years when it really could have. There's no reason why it didn't, besides the fact that we just decided to not give up. So I think that patience is very key. And if you're in college, you have a lot of patience, and the older you get, the harder it is to have that patience. We recognized that when we were 24. I was leaving behind a fine salary and some nice employment benefits. Nick wasn't leaving that much behind that he couldn't pick up the next day. But when you fast forward 5 years after graduation, where we are now, our friends have like real salaries. There's a big opportunity cost to giving up what their current job is and starting from ground zero. And there's a lot of other things that go into that sacrifice. And then when you have a family and kids and a mortgage, forget about it, right? Like the whole dynamic changes. You don't have that luxury of patience, and you might have to raise venture money because you need to provide the lifestyle that you have set up for yourself prior to starting your job. And that venture money is going to be breathing down your neck that you better be moving 0 to 60 faster than is reasonable. So anyway, I think your point about starting a business in college or as early as possible, it's so key. And this idea that you need to go get real world experience and work at a company first, it's false. It's like, there's no way to start a business besides just starting the business.
Just doing it. Yeah. What do you guys love? What would you say is your favorite thing about being an entrepreneur? It sounds like both of you, I mean, there's a debate, like, is it an instinct? Is it like something that's inherent that you're just like entrepreneurial? Is it something you learn over time? Is it just suited to certain people? But what's like your favorite thing about entrepreneurship? And have you always wanted both of you to be entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think we probably both agree. Number one is just autonomy, just like being able to dictate what your life is like at all moments, what your workday is like. I mean, the reality is, like, you kind of think that you're gonna start your own business and become like entrepreneur to like get out of the work week and get out of the like corporate trap, but like you end up working the same way that you would at any other job. It's just much more on your own terms. So I think that that autonomy is my favorite part by far. And there's just like a ton of really enjoyable things, especially once you start to have some success. So just like being young and at the forefront of something. And like, I really love being able to sit at a table with people who are like 20 years our senior and like really feel like they respect you and like respect what you're able to do. That's great. But the autonomy, full stop, is like the best part of it. And then I would say, like, to the feeling like an entrepreneur, I think Rob and I are pretty similar, but like also have differences. I personally felt, and I don't think Rob is the same way, that I was like pretty unemployable. Like, I don't think I really ever could have had a corporate job. So I think it was start a business that was successful or find a beach somewhere. Like, I'm not really sure. But with that, I had a huge risk appetite because I didn't think I was leaving anything behind. And I had like a very unwarrantedly high degree of self-confidence that I could pull something off, where looking back, I had no reason to. Like, it's just ridiculous to even think that. So I think there is like a little bit in the DNA of someone that it's really just risk appetite. Like, you're in chaos every single day for like years on end. There's no structure, there's no order, and it gets really mentally and emotionally fatiguing. But if you can weather that and you have a good business idea, then and you do value the autonomy to the extent where you're willing to do something as ridiculous as start your own business, then I think it's like a relatively good cocktail to be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, autonomy 100%. I essentially value autonomy at however much money I didn't earn in the 3 years it took to start this business. Also, for me, knowing that there's like families, having employees has been so cool to me. It's such an eye-opening experience, but to know that, Nick and I worked for so long to put CampusReel into the world. And now that this business is providing for other families, and like having these people jump onto our bandwagon, or not bandwagon, that like there's no negative connotation, but having these people jump onto our train, right, and take on this mission together is so cool. And it's very humbling, and I feel very honored that people would trust us with that level of responsibility. So having employees has been really, really rewarding, and knowing that like we're helping them put food on the table and all that stuff is cool. So I just, yeah. And that's newer for us. We've only had our first employee for 6 or 7 months, but now we're hiring 3 more. And so it's growing quickly, but it's a very cool thing to experience.
Yeah, I think Maya, you could speak to this too, but hiring our first full-time employee, just seeing, you're truly impacting someone's life. You're providing a means of living. Because I've always struggled with a marketing agency. Am I doing good for, I'm helping businesses grow, but, there's nonprofits I could start, or, it's doing something good. But when you're employing people, you're truly making an impact.
Yeah.
Transitioning a bit, what do you guys like with COVID and this just crazy year? How do you think COVID has transformed your business, or like, has there been any differences you've had to, or challenges you've had to face?
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate. I mean, 40% of small businesses just got decimated within like 2 months out of nowhere. So I don't think that's lost on us. Like, not only did we not really take a hit from COVID, I think our business benefited in a pretty meaningful way. When it first happened, it was beneficial to the extent that students and parents, I mean, I feel bad even using the word beneficial because like it's so bad for everyone, but like for the company itself, it was beneficial to the extent that students and parents just weren't able to go travel. And we had what was perceived as a virtual tour platform. It's not really that, but so we really did emerge as kind of like one of the resources that was able to be helpful in that space. But where it's become incredibly helpful for our core business, which is now partnering officially with colleges, university, grad programs throughout the country and world, is that the higher ed space historically has been really hesitant to adopt new technologies. It's very much like an industry run by an older generation with more antiquated systems, and just they've been doing things the same way for a really long time, and there hasn't really been a need for them to change it too much. There has been a gradual push towards adopting new technologies and kind of like really living inside of this digital first ecosystem. What COVID did was kind of like rip the Band-Aid off and make it just non-optional. So like for those institutions that were like, yeah, I get that, video virtual is important. Like I'll give it another year, 2 years, 3 years, like there's no rush. The conversation just completely changed. Institutions had to put aside budget to bring on new virtual initiatives. So I think in that respect, it made our job, our company, just like our solution really did emerge, I think, within the industry as something that was like so on the nose for what was needed. But I think just the appetite for the industry in general to adopt new technology came at a very, we were kind of hitting an inflection point where we were perfectly set up to be able to partner with these institutions. So it felt, I mean, I hate saying it felt lucky or fortunate, but like the timing was very fortuitous for CampusReel. And now I think it's, I don't think we're directly benefiting so much from what's going on with COVID, and there are limitations because a lot of institutions are financially having trouble, but the whole conversation within the industry about like taking on new technology has completely changed, which I think was our benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been crazy, like being in remote school right now and actually seeing how people are, and institutions themselves were able to, I think, pretty successfully adapt to it. At least I had a good enough experience. But yeah, like you said, like I started a company in e-commerce, so I completely understand like kind of seeing a benefit come out of it, although it was of course tragic and still terrible. But
yeah, when you find a solution, that you think that is going to happen eventually, timing is so important. This is another thing we talked about in the last episode is when you're picking your niche, kind of think about when it's going to be adopted, because it's going to happen at some point, but you don't know when. Universities, I feel like, are some of the slowest moving ones to start adopting new trends. So really COVID just accelerated and forced a need.
That's a good point. And that also relates to, what I was saying about how we pivoted from the very original idea of this, virtual reality. And someone said to us, we were talking with this investor in a Panera or something like that. Or La Pan, that's where it was. And he was like, yeah, this is all great, but I think you guys are overestimating how rapidly VR is going to be adopted. We were like, no way, dude. It's all over the news. It's everywhere. And it was like, I think like under 1% of households have a VR headset in their living room. And we were like, that's probably right. Like we're going to create this awesome VR thing and no one's going to be able to use it because nobody uses VR. And, we could have built the business, and then if we could do something else for the next 10 years until people had VR, then it would have been relevant. But, COVID for us essentially compressed probably 7 or 8 years of slow progress in higher ed into a 8-week to 12-week window. And it also really helped us attract talent because, employees to come work for us, because they're working at companies that are just outdated. They've been, riding on the coattails of a brand that was built in the 1980s or 1990s. And people are realizing that those solutions don't work, and people don't want to work for a company that they feel like is declining, so they saw, potential employees also saw us as a really cool opportunity to get in on the ground floor and grow with a bigger company, or grow into a bigger company as opposed to decline with a big company. So that was the other element of it.
When you saw all that traction, or when you saw the kind of compression that COVID created in the space, did you have any fear of almost like growing too fast or scaling too quickly to a rate that you couldn't sustain as a company?
I still think that timing has been everything. And even now, like we were getting anywhere from 5 to 10 new clients a month, which is great, but learning how to make those, first you have to build a product that works. Then you have to learn how to sell it. Then you have to learn how to deliver the product, right? And so we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants. We learned how to build it, how to sell it. And then also we started getting all these customers, and we're like, oh my God, we got to make sure that all of these customers are happy. And every year that, comes by, they rebook with us, because that's how we'll build a bigger business. And we didn't start figuring that out until after we started selling, because you have to have clients in order to learn that part first. And even now, I think, if we were able to sign 100 clients a month, we wouldn't be able to do it. It's good that we're going at 5 to 10 per month, because we're getting our feet wet, and that will allow us to scale effectively moving forward. But we easily could have scaled too quickly, and we didn't, more because we just naturally did not. Had we gone and raised $5 million in venture capital and hired 15 salespeople, it could have been a different story. We would have been biting off way more than we could chew. We wouldn't have been ready for that. So I think it's definitely something to be aware of. Like, you want to be controlled in how you scale, for sure. Otherwise, all that money you book just isn't going to come back next year,
What's next for you guys? What you mentioned, wanting to 3x the 500,000. Did I catch that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, what's next? What are you guys most excited about right now with CampusReel? Or
yeah, so I mean, what our core business, like North Star, what we're laser focused on is institutional partnerships with colleges, university, grad programs, hospitals, even non-traditional. And I think there's been a couple of things that have been really exciting. I think the first part is to just realize that like this solution that we've been working on for 3 years is so relevant and helpful to institutions throughout the country and world. But I think what we've come to appreciate is that everyone, I mean, it's not just in higher ed, but within higher ed, like undergrad, community colleges, from Harvard Business School on the grad level to like a small community college in Santa Barbara that you've never heard of to Mass General Hospital, all of these institutions are struggling with the same exact thing. They need video to be able to compete in an increasingly digital first world, and they just don't have the right solution to be able to create video at scale. So it's all to say that our market, where what we thought the market was like kind of traditional four-year undergrad, very much building out like a college search resource. And what we realized is that the market is like 6 to 7 times bigger than we thought it was. And honestly, it's probably bigger than we even realized. Like we could start working with boarding schools, we could start working with, like destination type excursions. So I think looking forward, like we want to be powering video for every single institution across all the types throughout the US and abroad as well. We're starting to enter into the European market. We've signed a couple like super brand name schools throughout Europe. I think we really want to scale through Europe. We want to scale through Canada and then turn our sights to Asia and really just have like CampusReel's flag planted on every corner of the higher id ecosystem.
Wow. Yeah, that's an ambitious but amazing goal. And yeah, I can see this in so many different use cases. What would you want people, well, I'll ask 2 questions. One is your biggest, that's cliche of a question, I think it usually gets some good answers, is your biggest, what have you learned from being an entrepreneur? The one thing that you've learned and would tell your younger self starting out, what have you learned?
My biggest takeaway, what I would tell my younger self, I think when you're in college and when you're a kid just kind of growing up, like you look at adults as like adults and they have it figured out, and the corporate world, like big companies, big banks, like these are well-oiled machines with people who are like super sophisticated, well beyond what you could even comprehend, and they just have it down to a T. And being an entrepreneur, you just get under the hood. I mean, one, you start to like run your own operation and realize a lot of things, but you just start to get under the hood and like meeting with executives across industries. And what you start to realize is everybody is winging it. Like nobody has it figured out. Everybody is just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. It's the difference between the aptitude and competency of a college age student who's tech savvy and motivated is really not far off from, a 55-year-old exec. And they're honestly, the younger kid is probably much more capable of doing stuff because they're not jaded by like 30 years of being inside of more corporate antiquated systems. So my intimidation level, like I just feel like, this is cliche too, and I don't mean this in like a self-congratulating way, but from doing this, I feel like I can do anything. Like nothing really intimidates me, going into a space. I just realized like people are people. I know people, like, everybody is just kind of trying their best and figuring it out on the fly. So that's been amazing for me to realize this early on in life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think patience, like we talked about, has been, I would say that's the single most important factor to our success so far. I always knock on wood when I say that stuff because to Nick's point, we haven't arrived anywhere close to where we want to be, but we're in a good spot. The other thing, I guess it's kind of related, 2 parts. The emotional toll of entrepreneurship is something I had no appreciation for at all. And I think a lot of outsiders or people who haven't done it, like it's just impossible to know or to understand. And I've been shocked at how much of a roller coaster it is. To your point, Sheila, like if I weren't doing this with Nick, I'm sure I would have thrown in the towel after 12 months. Like it just would have been too much. And now that I've gone through it once, I feel a lot more confident in my future businesses. Like I can execute a lot more strongly, but there's just so many unknowns. And that speaks to the point that you can't read a textbook and do this. You just have to jump in. So I would say, you have to have a good, I think, support system or something there for you to get through all of the downs that are inevitable. And what I'd also say kind of relates to that, and what I've been working more on for myself, is like, you can't measure yourself against anybody else. It's very easy for me to look at like what some of our friends are doing and, depending on how much money they're making or whatever it might be, whatever your yardstick is for success, If you're running your own business, like you have to just create your own yardstick. There's nobody providing a performance review for you. Every dollar you earn has been earned because you did it, right? And it's not like a bonus that somebody allocates. If you get hit by a bus, the business isn't going to be there the next day. It's just a totally different thing. So you have to really create your own yardstick and not worry kind of about what other people are doing, And for the first few years, it was very easy to be like, oh man, if I did this, I would be over there. And I have no regrets at all. Like, this is how I want to live my life. But it's easy to get kind of wrapped up in what you're missing by doing something like this,
Yeah. I love all the metaphors, the yardstick.
Yeah.
Do you think you can have too big of goals? How do you know like the realistic numbers or quantities or quality that you want to hit in the next year or 3 years out?
And just to add on to that, like, do you think it's better to have goals that are too big or goals that are smaller than, like, not giving yourself enough credit?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you're not delusional, then like shoot for the stars. Like, don't limit yourself whatsoever. As long as you know, like, there's every chance in the world you're not going to get to the point that you want to be at. Like, kick the can as far down the road. So even if you fall short, you're like farther than if the can was closer. But I think I think if you don't have those big goals, it's just impossible to stay motivated and remind yourself why you're doing it. Like, especially because it's so brutal on a day to day, especially like when it's, before you're really getting traction and you just have to like try to find a way to keep going and convince yourself. And if you don't see that carrot at the end of the stick and what it could be, then I think it really just you just become sort of like demotivated and you can't remind yourself why you're doing it. So I think you always need that stick, but you don't want to like live in that like big vision land. Like, you just need to come back to the current moment and be like, I have some really boring like 4 hours of work ahead of me that I have to do. It doesn't matter if I think that we're going to be worth this. Like, today we need to accomplish what today is. So I think really like everyone should shoot for the stars. And I think the only people who are really successful is because they believe they could do it and went for it. But there's a lot of people who believe that they can do it and go for it and who aren't successful. So it's no guarantee from that. But I think, yeah, you got to shoot for the stars, but there are people I think who get caught up in this big vision and it almost inflates them to the point where they're not willing to do the right now work that gets them to that point.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. Like, if you keep your goal it just depends. It totally depends on also what you're looking to get out of it. Like, Nick and I are in this business for reasons that my mom has her own business. She's a therapist. She just has her own book of 30 clients and that's what she does. And she's awesome at it. She's not trying to build this big empire, and exit and everything. So if you're approaching a business from the perspective of you want to build a big business, then you have to have that as your vision. If you're thinking, maybe a year from now we'll be making, $10,000, you're probably not going to be willing to do all of the dirty work and sacrifice the opportunity cost of what you'd earn elsewhere. If you have that bigger vision of what something could turn into with everything going right, then you stay motivated. I mean, not to bring another metaphor into it, but I really look at this whole thing as like one giant chess game. And it very much is like that, like a chess game. It's like the world's ultimate chess game. And instead of spanning over 2 or 3 hours, it's spanning over 4 to 10 years. And rather than being one-on-one, it's like a whole team of people putting in thousands of hours. So it's like the ultimate chess game. But in chess, your goal is to capture the king. But if that's the only thing you focus on, you're going to lose all your pieces very quickly. Like, there's a million little goals that contribute to being able to win the game in the end. So it's about keeping that long-term vision out there, but you got to execute. It's all about executing. I mean, I'm sure everyone listening has heard like an idea is worth absolutely nothing. There's a million amazing ideas, a million, but if you can't execute it doesn't matter. So it's all about the little things.
I also think, now that I've thought about it for a second, I also think one, you need to find intrinsic value in what you're doing. You can't do everything for the reward. Like, if you're not doing it to grow or to learn or because you genuinely enjoy it, like, you're just not going to stay on task. And then I was also thinking, like, you want to have that really lofty goal, but I don't know if you have to, but I think it's really beneficial to also be okay with results that are dramatically different maybe than that carrot at the end of the stick. Like, I know there was a point Now, like we said earlier, like our goals are to take over the world with this and like really blow it out. But there was a point where Rob and I were saying like, this might just be a lifestyle business. Like, we might just be able to make like a nice income for both of us. We don't never hire like a huge team. We don't grow it in a big way, but like we run our own company and we make some nice revenue, and like maybe, we only do it part-time and there's other things to do on the side. And we were okay with that. And I think that being okay with that meant that like in that sort of 1 to 2 year middle phase where we just like weren't sure where we were going, like you're not like, it would be so daunting to be like, it's, $1 billion company or bust, like at that point, because we just saw no path there. But if you're like, listen, I'm happy if we can just support ourselves financially, just us two through these efforts, like then you bring the flag back a lot and it's still in front of you, but it keeps you motivated and humble and you're not like completely overwhelmed. And then by the time you get to that flag, maybe the other flag is actually more attainable.
So thank you guys for being here. I think that really wraps it up.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks guys so much for watching. We're gonna be releasing episodes weekly and we're trying to hit the bar. So we're gonna peace out. Be sure to like, subscribe, all the other things, all the social medias, comment, share, retweet, copy, paste link. Isn't that the TikTok thing? Just full send it. Get it done. Get it done. Get us some likes, guys. Hope you guys enjoy.